Thank you all for joining us. We are back with our next session. This is on our Midwest Big Data Innovation Hub priority areas and ways that folks can get engaged in those ongoing activities. We have a number of our PIs, co-PIs, and other project leads joining this call, along with additional audience members. We would really like to have a good discussion and engagement with the folks on the call and look at ways for people to get involved in the work that we do on the hub here. Hopefully you can see my screen, which is a list of the theme areas that we focus on in the Midwest Hub. If you were on the call earlier today, we were talking about the hub being part of the network of 4 NSF-funded hubs across the country. And so some of those theme areas vary by geographic region based upon strengths and challenges within the region. And so here are the areas that we are focused on in the Midwest. And that also includes some of the topics that we addressed in our last couple of sessions on cyber infrastructure and data science education. So happy to have a good group joining us for this discussion. What I'd like to do is have the project leads just spend a few minutes talking about your current activities and where there are opportunities for folks to get engaged in those. I see that we have Ivo Dinov from University of Michigan on the call, who leads our Big Data in Health priority area. I see Valentin Penchev from Indiana University, who leads our Smart and Resilient Communities area. Carolyn Lawrence-Dill is joining us from Iowa State University, who helps lead our digital agriculture area. I think I saw Aaron Bergstrom on the call as well, who's been a long-time partner in that digital ag space as well. And I think I see Jeff Peterson from the University of Minnesota. Yeah, hi, Jeff, who leads our water quality theme from the Water Resource Center at Minnesota as well. So thank you all for being here. Looking forward to talking through the work that you're doing with our audience today. We can start with Ivo, if you'd like, to talk about big data and health and the work led out of Michigan.
Thanks very much for joining. I'm Ivo Dinov. I represent the University of Michigan, and it's we've had quite a bit of success working with the Midwest Big Data Hub. So I'll point some of the open biomedical team science challenges that we are facing. So very briefly, many of us are part of what's called the Advanced Computational Neuroscience Network, the ACNN, which organically spawned outside of the Midwest Big Data Hub, and it includes these institutions that you see here. So the important thing of open science, and particularly open health science, includes these sources on the top that include raw information, data about the data or metadata, study designs, and so forth. In the middle layer, you see these hardware, software, tools, obviously services and collaborations. And at the bottom, we typically have some outcome measures, publications, sharing of information, and so forth, which are all important components of what we do in terms of big data health in the Midwest Big Data Hub. So a few key components to outline here is, first of all, well, where are these health data resources? Can I use these analytical tools? And then some of the very specific things to health are, subject protection, the identification of sensitive information, and so forth. The third one relates to this notion of building data-driven clinical decision support systems. And the last one is, I think it's very important to all of us at ACNN and the Midwest Big Data Hub, the notion of cross-cutting across teams, linking specifically with data science education, building curricula for workforce development, and more broadly, data sharing. So in terms of the first component that I had this, where is the data? Here are just some examples that we are very frequently using. Data that's findable, data that's accessible, interoperable, and reusable. This is very important. The FAIR principles of data sharing are important to all of us. And some examples include the UK Biobank, as you can see here, the MIMIC consortium from PhysioNet, The soccer lab here at the University of Michigan has many hundreds of interesting data sets that we share. And then again, here are some of the data sets provided from the National Institutes of Health. So here is just one example from the some specifications about some of these resources. The complexity, thousands, almost millions of cases, part of the UK Biobank. Mimic has 40,000 emergency room visits, and NIH has hundreds of these open databases. How about the tools? Well, some of the tools that our group is involved in developing are openly accessible through the soccer website. You can see some of these things both as learning modules, GitHub sources, instructional materials, and online web demonstrations. And by the way, if anybody is interested in these slides are available online, just Google soccer news, SOCR news, and you'll find the activities. You can find the slides, or if you want, I can post them in the chat. So in terms of the second thing that I mentioned a little bit earlier, this notion when you deal with healthcare data, one of the biggest things is obviously, HIPAA, FERPA, and all kinds of state, federal, institutional, and other regulatory mechanisms that require that the data of individuals be protected. So imagine the situation where you have two users, which are, let's think of them as being STEM experts. These people know how to develop algorithms, they know how to develop protocols, they know how to analyze data, but they want to tap into a health system data, which are the data governors. So they submit a request to the data owner, and then the data owner goes through a process that we call data sifting to desensitize data using an advanced statistical obfuscation technique called the data sifter, which is an iterative algorithm that starts with data that is kind of messy, right? I mean, none of the healthcare data is complete. It's got all kinds of incongruencies, oftentimes problems, let's be honest. And then the algorithm tries to protect the original distribution of the data through those iterative processes. And at the end, it generates one complete data computable object, which can be shared with the external users. Now, because during this process, the data is desensitized, which basically means two things. First of all, on a record-by-record case, the data is significantly adulterated, so it's manipulated. However, the joint distribution of the cohort or the population is protected to a large extent. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to preserve the utility of the data, the value of the information that's stored right up here, and at the same time prevent end users from being able to identify individuals because on a case-by-case level, the data is significantly altered. So this is important for us, and obviously, once you have this, you can capitalize on the incredible amount of expertise that we have, not only within the Midwest big data community. We have expertise throughout the world, actually, to build some of these what's called clinical decision support systems. And I'm just showing you here two examples of two things that we've built. The first one, essentially, is a pressure injury prediction model. You put in the characteristics of a patient that just checked in the hospital, and it reports for you the likelihoods or the probabilities that they will develop in that specific unit a pressure injury, which is kind of an ulcer. The second app shows you how you can paste in very high dimensional data. So here is 10,000 individuals and 200 neuroimaging derived measures. And you can essentially project them into 2 and 3 dimensions and literally visualize all of your 10,000 individuals into the browser and interrogate it through what's called exploratory visual data analytics. We're also developing some new cutting-edge tools for analyzing longitudinal data. Most of the health and biomedical data is longitudinal in nature. So in other words, there is interesting characteristics that we are exploring. So we are generalizing the time series into what we call complex time surfaces. And then the idea is that we use these complex time surfaces, and here is an example with an fMRI, functional magnetic resonance imaging, where you have a time course at every spatial location in the brain. this time series is converted into a complex time surface, and then we do statistics on this to find out the areas in the brain that are associated with specific functional tasks. And finally, again, as I mentioned, we, in the Midwest Big Data Hub, there is quite a bit of synergies. We have a number of educational materials. We offer certificates. We have doctoral training programs. And just like every other institution or organization, we conduct workshops, symposia, and so forth. We have a number of e-books, electronic books that we are sharing, and so forth. So at this point, here are many of our collaborators within the hub and the ACNN. So any questions would be welcome either now or after we hear the other pillars. Thank you.
Great. Thanks very much, Ivo. I think we'll go to Carolyn next. Hi, Carolyn. Thanks for joining today.
Okay. So what I've put together here is mainly something that has been a lot of discussing that we've done on how to maybe improve our seed granting program in digital ag. So let me just move on to the first slide. We have past accomplishments. There are a lot of them. And that bottom bullet that is the past accomplishment that seed grants is really the one that really I feel like we've made a lot of progress with, probably the most impact for building teams and getting teams off and running so that they have a good place to start out and look for grants. If you look upward from that bottom bullet, you'll see that we also did create, back in the day, one of the first gatherings that was the basis for launching the North American Plant Phenotyping Network, and we also put together Plant Phenomics Fridays. I should also say that a lot of work with North Dakota with Aaron Bergstrom has really been successful. But what I want to focus on today is how we think that we can increase our impacts for big data in the spaces that you see here on the right. The first is the ethical, legal, social, environmental, and economic impacts. The second is building community with minority serving institutions. And the third is diversity, equity, and inclusion. And then I'm going to tell you about an emergent topic where we think that data and ag intersect that likely will be the basis for a seed grant opportunity upcoming. So increasing impacts, these areas that I mentioned already, ethical, legal, social, environmental, and economic considerations, et cetera, those were things that as we looked at who in agriculture was putting in seed grants, who was building teams, it was always hard to make those kinds of connections. And we felt like when we looked at the teams, they were not always sort of engaged connections. They were almost artificial, sort of as a tack on of some sort. So we thought, how are we going to approach that? We want to be able to create teams that include that kind of expertise and try to get those aspects on even footing with the STEM researchers and their roles in the project, primarily because the concept is that those impacts are what it is that we want to achieve, and the STEM fields are how we get there. Everything that we saw organized sort of grew out of a STEM field, and then maybe it had impact, let's hope, and that seemed backward to us. So, sorry, got a thing popped up. Can't progress. That's weird. Sorry. Got it. So here's what we did. We brought together 3 different groups for listening sessions, and you can see across the top there the groups of people that we brought together. At the end, you'll see their names in case you want to reach out to any of those people. So our goal was that we wanted to be able to, for the Midwest Big Data Hub, draft a call for proposals that better engages diverse stakeholders, minority serving institutions, and researchers that were focused on LC components, and make sure that we were able to have societal impact. And so we brought these groups together and had listening sessions. And what I mean by listening sessions was we described what our problem was and just asked, what are we missing? How are we doing this wrong? Why are we not finding that our teams that we build include people beyond STEM fields. I don't know why this doesn't progress. I keep losing it. Oh, there we go. Okay, so for increasing impacts, this is what we got out of our listening sessions, that we need to bring together groups of people to discuss societal impacts per se, with a focus on the problems in agriculture. And what we've decided to do is to moderate in the next couple of months a full day session or longer to talk about how we're going to do this in the digital ag space. We want to be able to enable open participation. We think it will be key to invite individuals that already are thinking along these lines to sort of set the scene and talk about how it is that we can make these impacts. And then we want to open up our seed grant RFPs so that people can put in to do what it is that we've always been doing in the past, and that is to fund people in digital agriculture. But we want to do it based on what it is that we learn from this convening that is about how to better address societal needs. And then we're going to be really thoughtful about how we write those RFPs. And let me describe that just a little bit. You have seen all the RFPs in the world where it's written up, we're going to pull together these three things. These are the areas of focus and interest. And then it says, by the way, you have to include ethical, legal, social, or you have to include. And it talks about these things in a way that if you just think of the architecture of your RFP, the reason people write these aspects of the project on as tack-ons is because our requests for proposals organize those topics as tack-ons instead of organizing those topics as the framework for which we are trying to generate projects that address and create impacts. So this sort of turns the whole how we engage people around and drops it on its head. The other topic that we want to address with seed grants in the next few months, and you're going to see this because these requests for proposals will be available to you, is to look at emergent topics where data and ag intersect. And one of those that has been in all of the news lately has been ransomware attacks, both with JBS. This one was fairly high profile at a meat packing plant. And then one within the last month that was a ransomware attack on grain elevators. This was in Iowa. Luckily, the people that suffered those attacks could still remember how it was that they could do their work with pieces of paper until they sorted it out and didn't pay the ransom. So we've been talking a good deal with people that are working in cybersecurity on how we can generate an RFP for seed grants that are in the space of cybersecurity for agriculture. So that's the other small RFP that you will see coming out in addition to those things that I described on the previous slide. So with that, the two people at Iowa State that are the PI and co-PI in digital ag are Jim Reese as PI and me as a co-PI. And the group of people that we met with 3 different listening sessions are listed by name on the left. And the coordinator for all of that has been Karen Bramow. So with that, I am happy to answer any questions you might have on how we're approaching what it is we're doing in digital ag for the Midwest Big Data Hub in the next few months.
Thanks very much, Carolyn. I just wanted to have you do a clarifying statement on the seed fund program that you're talking about versus the Midwest Hub
Yes.
CDE program, because they are separate. Is that right?
That is exactly correct. So we have a budget that is for seed grants in the space of digital agriculture, and that's what I've been talking about. Mm-hmm. Thank you. That helps.
Yeah, and we're happy to make those distinctions in more detail for folks on the call. But yes, we do have a central program that we call the Community Development and Engagement program for the hub-wide, but also other partner institutions have their own programs to help establish those early stage projects. So thanks very much for that. I think we're going to move on to Valentin Penchev from Indiana to talk about our Smart and Resilient Communities topic.
My presentation is not as interesting as Ivo's and Caroline's. It's just an introduction of who we are and what we do. And I apologize for my heavy winter clothing. IU has built a fantastic new Luddy AI building that we all moved in, but they haven't figured out the HVAC systems yet. So my name is Valentin Penchev. I'm the PI for the principal investigator for smart, connected, and resilient communities out of Indiana University. And I represent a little bit larger group. With me as co-investigators, there's Franco Pestilli, who used to be at IU, used to be the PI for us, and has now moved to University of Austin, Texas. And also Ina Cooper, who is still at IU and is the third co-investigator on the platform. We also have with us Beth Playley, who is probably taking up the PI ship from me in the spring of 2022, and will hopefully lead the hub and the Smart Connect communities into some even greater areas than we could. A few things that we've done. My slides have a lot of text on it, and I am not going to read all of it, but because it's a presentation that's being recorded and the slides are available, I left the text here for people who would like to read it later. This is one of the Franco's activities, brainlife.io. I believe Ivo Dinov was involved in it as well. Platform to democratize the neuroscience research for institutions who could not afford to work with it. This was in the phase one in the hub. And another democratizing neuroscience in the Midwest and minority serving institutions. This is led by Dr. Delo Lawrence in the Technological University. This was the award of one of the first seed funds in smart and resilient communities. I myself, this is another one from Kimberly Zerekor, who you can hear talk tomorrow on our larger meeting about smart and connected communities, about overcoming the rural data deficit to improve quality of life and community services in smart and connected communities. And there should have been here another one. Yeah, this is the one that I lead, the Collaborative Archive for Data Research Environment, which is trying to build a smart infrastructure for science of science research through the Midwest by using paid contributions by the big R1 institutions and the Big Ten, and also allowing a free tier for minority-owned smaller libraries and colleges to participate. And the reason I mentioned all of those different projects is to show how really different the smart and connected communities are. What we have in the works, we're trying to engage private business through IoT labs in Fishers, Indiana. We're engaging the Indiana University Center for Rural Engagement and their counterpart at Purdue, the NCRCRD, North Central Regional Center for Rural Development. And what I'm trying to convey with this presentation is that a lot of what you do and what you participate in can be part of smart and connected communities. The regional data that governments share, which is not standardized to a point that can be shared between different state boundaries, is part of smart and connected communities. The cell phone towers and connectivity maps and connectivity deserts in the Midwest that will be part of our discussion tomorrow are also part of smart and connected communities. The sensors and the IoT technologies used by big cities in Chicago initially and now appearing into small parts of the Midwest as well are also part of smart and connected communities. So we are here, we are part of the Midwest Big Data Hub, and we are open to collaborate with anyone who has any interest in the area of smart and connected communities in general, or it's cross-cutting through other areas of the Midwest Big Data Hub. Here is my contact information, and interested in entertaining any collaborative research offers.
Great. Thanks very much, Val. And I think folks can see there's a lot of potential connections between the smart and resilient communities with health and rural broadband, agriculture. There's lots of potential for cross-theme engagement there. Another area that I think is very relevant there as well is water quality. And so we do have Jeff Peterson from Minnesota on the call. Hi, Jeff. Let's hear about the work that you're doing in that space.
So yes, I'm Jeff Peterson. I'm director of the Water Resources Center at the University of Minnesota, the co-PI responsible for the water quality priority area, along with some of my colleagues here, Jim Wilgenbush, who has been joining for some of this meeting, and you might have heard from already, Shashi Shekhar and Adam Wilkie, who's no longer at the U of M, but was here when we developed a lot of this work. So the water quality priority area is a relative newcomer to the Midwest Big Data Hub. This priority area was added in the second phase of the Hub's funding. And in part, that probably reflects the fact that the water quality data space, in a lot of ways, might be a little bit behind some of the areas like big data and health and ag. The reason being that, of course, there's a lot of water quality data out there. Some of it is being collected on a second-by-second basis and is even available in near real time. But there's still a lot of frictions in the FAIR criteria. So there's data sets that are, in theory, findable if you wanted to look hard enough and submit a FOIA request or something like that. But they're not necessarily easily findable. There's a lot of interoperability issues. So there's a need and much opportunity for improved management and research if we can reduce some of those frictions. So the Hub being a convening organization, our theory of the case here is that we could make the fastest progress we could make was by expanding the network kind of as quickly and efficiently as we could to draw out from that network what the current state of affairs was or is, what kind of challenges and bottlenecks remains, and what people are doing about that, how we could work together to further resolve them. So, of course, the Hub always has and continues to make connections with individuals or small teams in various sectors in university and government, industry, and nonprofits. But they also can have greatly expanded their network by connecting with larger organizations who, in these sectors, who themselves often are connected to multiple of these sectors I mentioned. So we thought that those of us who have domain expertise and experience in the water resources area also have our own connections in the water space with some of these big organizations. A lot of the people and teams affiliated with those certainly have interests in data and how to reduce these data frictions. So we've been focusing our efforts on these organization level connections and then bringing the participants in those networks together. So I'll just go through a couple of examples of how we've been doing that. One is something called the Water Data Forum. This is a monthly discussion series that's all virtual. It's been going on for basically a year now. We're working on the second year of forum topics. This is a joint venture of the Midwest Big Data Hub along with the Water Environment Federation and Cleveland Water Alliance. Both of those are nonprofit organizations, but they have a large number of connections in industry, other nonprofits, government, and so on. So the Water Data Forum, the topics vary, but the general theme is that we bring out a water data topic every month that's of broad interest to the community in the sense of being a challenge or being able to share recent insights that would be valuable to people. And it's, I think, had a positive response. We've had pretty good participation, and it's been split pretty evenly across those sectors. Another thing we did was sponsor a special session at a water resources conference on big data. Again, this kind of attracted the people in those organizations who are especially interested in data issues. So our speakers there were from sort of a cross-cutting set of organizations. They all talked about some of their water activities, the challenges they're working on. I think we had a pretty good, pretty robust discussion of where to go next and how we might work together. We also try to promote events and other activities that we don't necessarily organize in the hub, but would be of interest to the hub's audience. So a couple of examples are there's been some workshops on a knowledge-guided machine learning project that is that was hosted here at the University of Minnesota, although both of these are virtual, so that made little difference. There's a number of folks working in that area, knowledge-guided machine learning, that have water applications. So there's a big chunk of that event that was water-related. There's an organization called QUASI, the Consortium for the Advancement of Hydrologic Sciences, it Incorporated. They came out of the hydrology community, but are really focused on a lot of these data challenges. Also have NSF funding and sponsor a number of opportunities for students along with events that we try to promote. So just I'll mention a couple of things in the hopper here as we look ahead. We do have a request for proposals out at our center. We have a grant program called the Watershed Innovations Grants. And I've been actually talking with Jim Reese at Iowa State because we have some common interests and common themes coming up here in these areas. We built into our RFP some priorities in both data and equity. So the due date is coming up now. That project will fund students who would automatically, if they're funded, become part of the Midwest Big Data Hub student community. That one, I should be clear, is an internal competition to the University of Minnesota. So I kind of take this as a test case to see how it works, and hopefully we can find ways to combine resources and do these more broadly in the future. There's the community development engagement projects, several of which have water elements, and you've heard about some of those. There's great opportunities there. We are in the planning stages of a workshop to bring together folks who work in the area of aquatic invasive species. There's some very particular data collection and data sharing challenges in that area that we'll try to discuss. And then, of course, as has already been mentioned, water connects with a lot of these other priority areas in the hub. We've already been talking to some of these folks, and there's still a rich set of opportunities to be explored there. So I want to certainly leave time for questions here, but there are lots of ways you can get involved. You've been hearing this throughout the meeting already, I'm sure, and may be familiar with these, but if you haven't done it already, the first thing you should do is sign up for the Hub's mailing list, because you'll get information on all this. But they host a number of meetings, collaboration cafes, webinars like the Water Data Forum, but on a whole range of topics. If you're interested, you could host your own event. They have tools to help you with that. You might want to consider a community development engagement proposal. But above all, if you have any thoughts or ideas on any of these priority areas, I'm sure John would say, but particularly with water, in my case, any challenges you're working on, ideas you have about communities that you think would be good to bring together, we definitely would like to hear from you. So I put my contact information there, and I guess these slides will be shared, so you can find it that way. So that's all I have. Happy to turn it over for questions.
Perfect. Thanks very much, Jeff. And thanks to all of our panelists today. Questions from the audience at this point. What are you interested in hearing more about? How would you like to get engaged here?
Yeah, so I guess one of the questions I have is sort of what are the sort of challenges that are sort of most compelling, or that are sort of the biggest limiting factor in sort of using data-driven approaches to address some of the issues that you all had presented. And I mean, I know you're all sort of actively working on different data-driven approaches, but what are the things that you think are the sort of bottlenecks that we as a community might be able to sort of bring attention to? I think, Jeff, we've talked a little bit about sort of the integration challenges with sort of, that there's lots of different data sets out there, but how do you sort of get the scale to be aligned from, folks who've collected data for different purposes, but when you go to try to line them up, it always becomes a challenge to make sure that they're lining up right.
Indeed, that is one of the major issues in water, and I would guess maybe in other areas too, but there's data that are collected, as you say, for different purposes. So regulatory agencies collect data for their own purposes. Sometimes there's a really valuable information in those data sets for research purposes, but the data sets they have to be processed in some way to make them usable for that, and very often integrated with other data because you don't have all the variables you need, in that original data set. Beyond that, I mean, more generally, I would say it's the ability to, I mean, you could go through the FAIR principles, but you need findability and accessibility to interoperate data. And even in the cases where data have been found and accessed, there's still a lot of work to be done to interoperate these heterogeneous data sets. A lot of different data standards out there for different types of data, which is good to have the data standardized. But multiple standards have to work together. So I think a lot of the discussions we're having on water, I would say that's kind of been the focus, is more tools for interoperation, as well as building the skill sets of people who work in that area.
This is very well said, Jeff.
Sorry, go ahead.
Kathy, if I can follow up very, very briefly here. I put in the chat a few of these things, but, I'll tell you, it was very disappointing. Last week or something, I had a call with NIH, and they've got, and the same thing with NSF. I mean, they've got these huge consortia that have been funded for decades, literally, and you ask them on the call, where is the data? Can I use it? And the question is, yeah, we're packaging, I mean, it's kind of, people are giving you the finger pointing, there's a lot of education that we as a community need to do to make sure that when the society invests in research, that simply means that we own the data and own, quite frankly, the research. I mean, the fact that somebody else came up with first, they get acknowledged, they get rewarded, and so forth. But, you have sometimes situations where, half a decade or a decade later, the data is still not available. And I just don't know how these things come through the cracks. I mean, we all need to do a little bit of soul searching and, quite frankly, community exchange of information and persuading some of our colleagues. I mean, my personal philosophy is if it's not online, it's not accessible. I mean, Jeff is absolutely right. Certain things need to be, guarded. Data use agreements, fine, let's sign it. Let's kind of do these things. But But a lot of, again, and I'm talking big multi-million projects, they sit on it, they closely guard the tool chest, and that's a direct quote, these barriers need to come down.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of those sort of cultural challenges that I think the hub can play a role in. Certainly, there's a lot of organizations, including funding organizations, that do stand sort of behind the FAIR sort of principles, the findable, interoperable, accessible, reusable, but sort of making that pragmatic, making that actionable, like actually making that practical, is sort of another step, I would say. So yeah, I mean, I think one thing that we might be able to do is sort of a statement along those lines. Again, I'm sort of jumping to solutions before we really fleshed out the real issues here, but I think that as a community, that is something that we could start to advocate for. And again, I think the FAIR sort of community has sort of been able to help change some of that culture, because they came together and sort of crystallized, well, what are the key things about making this stuff useful. But again, I think we can have a sort of a follow-up to sort of say that that's sort of the research that we'd like to see. And I think our voices as a community would be, and sort of joining the FAIR community is sort of something that, would maybe help change those cultural challenges. I guess on the pragmatic side, again, I'm just kind of curious. So if other folks have questions, I talk to these chats quite often, so feel free to jump in and just turn your sound on. Let's have a conversation. Nat, I see you're here, and I think you've had some real successes in the astronomy community. So, really welcome your voice on, how to sort of, make that community engage with tools that you've developed. So really glad to see you here. But yeah, I guess the question I had was, so again, I think community culture wise to make that transition to share data is step zero, if you will. But even once that data has been shared, I guess I'm curious about sort of the ways in which folks share that. So certainly from a biomedical viewpoint, there's lots of ontologies that folks use. Or let me say, there's lots of ontologies that are available for folks to use. And so I guess I'm curious about, are there other, are ontologies sort of prevalent in other communities? Or my stuff deals mainly with unstructured text and sort of knowledge organization. And I guess I'm just wondering sort of how does that fall in this spectrum of interoperability and integration? Are those tools useful? What's lacking in those? Are they used? Because I'm not as familiar with some of the other domain areas.
Well, I would, just speaking from the perspective of the water world, one of the issues we have here is that water cuts across so many different fields of study and disciplines, so that when you talk about water data to a hydrologist, they have a very specific idea in mind about how that works and how you put data together. But if you're talking to social scientists who are studying water issues that might involve like transcripts of interviews and things like you're talking about, Kathy, or even like household survey data, those, at least from, I have not been able to find very many set standards, and the ones that are out there, I would say, are not followed very rigorously or consistently. So that is one of the data impurities, if you will, that have to be dealt with if you're trying to merge, and it's very laborious, right? So whether, but there might be tools to help accelerate that process. So that would be, that's a discussion that's going on right now, I think.
Yeah. Thank you all for that. I think we're going to have to stop the discussion here to get started on the next session. We have several student researchers presenting their work to us in the next session here, but I want to thank the panel for joining today. This was very helpful to hear about your work, and I think going forward, talking about some of the successes that you all have had in building groups from the sort of seed stage to the mature stage. Both Ivo and Carolyn talked about that, Val as well, and the work that you have done. What can we learn from those activities as we move through the second half of this award and want to replicate that work? So I think we'll take that as another topic to move forward on in the future. But thank you all for joining.